I want to start today's video by reminding you guys that Summer Games Done Quick is happening all week long. If you don't know what it is a speedrunning marathon charity event that raises money for Doctors Without Borders. It's an extremely good cause. It's running 24 hours a day until Sunday, I believe is the last day. And you need to get in there, man. If you've never seen speedruns before, if you don't really know much about speedrunning, it is an awesome place to get your first-hand experience with speedrunning. You may not know what the hell's going on, but a lot of the runners explain their runs in great detail. And you get to see a lot of your favorite games you grew up with, games you didn't even know about that look amazing from the past, the present, getting absolutely annihilated, glitched, wrecked, and just beaten in times you didn't think were possible. And again, it's all for a really good cause. I'll have the link to that, the live stream, which is live right now, down in the description as well as the pinned comment below. But let's move forward and kick off today's episode of Absolute Anthem. We're going to be talking a bit about Anthem's open world, really focusing on my expectations, my hopes and dreams and concerns for its open world. But why don't we start by taking a look at the things we know for sure, the confirmed information on Anthem's open world. First and foremost, it is one large, seamless open world. We're not going to be getting instanced areas like you do in Destiny or like in The Witcher 3. This is just one connected open world. All of the enemies within that open world are going to have different levels, meaning that you can boot up the game and fly to one area and get your arse absolutely handed to you by some enemy who way out levels you. We know very little about the biomes, although I believe Mark Darrow was asked about a winter or ice biome, and they said that that is not in the game, at least not currently. That is literally all we know about the open world. They haven't talked about the actual scale of it. We know from the footage we've seen for the EA Play demo that it appears to be very dense. You know, that sense of verticality. I shouldn't say that sense of verticality. That verticality that you get from the ability to fly, that freedom of flight, means that we have some pretty interesting world design in what we see as we dive into one of the strongholds in the EA Play demo for the Scars. You know, we get this really big open area with wyverns in it and turrets and this massive tower. I mean, it looks beautiful from a sense of, wow, here's an open world with serious height, serious layers to it. I think it's really impressive in that regard. But how is that all going to play out? You know, how is the actual shape, size of the open world going to influence our experience? That is something we don't know. So that's what I want to sort of speculate on today. I think there's a few things that an open world game needs to do for me to really drive home its open world. First and foremost is to ensure that while I'm going through level 1 through 30 or whatever the cap is, I get to experience new areas each and every time I make a substantial leap in my level. You know, by the time I get to endgame, level 30 we'll say in this case, I want to have seen new areas of the open world. Maybe not all of the open world, but I want to have had as little repetition in my journey as possible. The idea of backtracking multiple times is not something I'm interested in. Every now and then, going back to an area to complete a different quest or going to an old area and maybe accessing a new area within that old area, that's fine. But the idea of heavy repetition as I make my way from 1 to 30 is not something I want to see in any open world game, especially not a shared world shooter focused one like Anthem. Now, if there's extra content, like after that you go to endgame and you experience new parts of the world, that's icing on the cake. That's the cherry on the icing in the cake, as I always say. That's a big fat bonus, and that's something I'm really excited about. Let's talk about the design of the open world itself, because over the years, as open world games have grown and failed and succeeded, I've sort of developed a specific set of interest, I guess you could say, in the things that I really like in open world design. I think first and foremost, density is important. We do want areas of the map where the player feels like they can explore anywhere and everywhere and find something that exists as a reward. Now, that reward doesn't have to actually be physical items. It doesn't have to be loot. It doesn't have to be gear. It doesn't even have to be crafting resources. Sometimes it's just a really beautiful piece of environmental design. You know, that's one of the bonuses we have of big, expensive AAA game development, is that you go over that crest and you look out over that mountain and you've got a view that's worthy of a few screenshots, right? That's a big deal to me. I like that stuff. I find value in that stuff personally. So if I travel through some hidden part of the forest or some hidden corridor and I just see this incredible view of a lake, yeah, that's reward enough for me. Now, if I go down to that lake and I happen to find the beginning of a side quest or loot or a named boss, for example, some sort of a world boss that I can fight, then that's an extra bonus. And those are things I also want to see. You know, we want the world to feel like it's rewarding us for exploring it. Now, that density is important, and the sense of verticality that we're going to get inside of Anthem is also going to open up a lot of potential for making sure that smaller chunks of the world as we explore them have a lot more to explore. They feel more open, they feel more alive. But empty space is just as important. This is something I talked a lot about with Fallout 4, because I feel that was a game that didn't really do its empty space well enough. There were too many areas where it just felt really crammed and dense, and I'm not just talking about the city elements of Boston, but even the outskirts felt like there wasn't a lot of distance between them. There were a few areas of the map that really felt like they opened up and allowed me to feel like I was in just an empty, barren wasteland. That's a vibe that is important to deliver to your players every now and then. It's the reason I loved Assassin's Creed Origins. Origins wasn't afraid to say, by the way, that's the desert. There's not a lot happening in the desert. We've got a few mysteries for you, but it's a desert. You might find some cool stuff in that desert if you look hard enough, but for the most part, it's a desert. The game wasn't afraid to say, this is a big, open, empty sea of sand. And that adds to that realism, to that feel of the game world, where not everything is there to grab your attention. Sometimes it's there to exist, to add more life to the game by actually subtracting life from the game. That is definitely something I want to see in Anthem, especially with the ability to fly. Let me fly over some lakes, some rivers, some passageways. It doesn't all have to be loaded with things for me to do. Give me some empty spaces. And even if you give me those empty spaces and decide to pop a few things here and there, that's fine too. But that sense of just opening up the world every now and then and giving us a really good feeling of grandeur, of scale, can do a lot for making the player feel really planted in that open world. I mean, it's cool to have like canyons and corridors and to be winding through those things, but if I can look into the distance and see areas of the map where I can't actually go, when that's done right, that really does give you this sense of place, like I'm here, I'm there. I think The Division actually did a pretty good job of this with their New York City, where you could look down one of the blocks and see forever. You couldn't access that because, the world was broken off into its smaller chunk of what was a larger New York City, but that ability to just see that in the distance, I think, is a powerful thing. And I think we actually get to see a lot of that with the E3 2017 demo. There are instances where we see markers off in the distance, like you can go there, but a lot of what we're seeing in that opening scene as they make their way outside of the walls of Fort Tarsus is definitely like, that's the skybox, that's the background in the distance. The chances of us being able to go there are probably pretty slim, but it adds to that sense of scale for the world, and I really like that. Now, when we talk about the size of the world, I think that's actually the question that people like to ask, and I like to try and dig deeper than that, because games are more than just simple bits and pieces of terminology. Open world games are more than just, look how big our open world was. That was a selling point for a really long time, and for a really long time we got big open worlds with not a lot of interesting things in them. It took a while before worlds started to feel more crafted and focused, like the ones we get inside of The Witcher 3. I mean, every province, Novigrad to Skellige, in The Witcher 3 feels fantastic. It feels detailed, it feels rich, it feels alive, right? It's not just about its scale, it's about ensuring that that scale has purpose. And that's a really important thing for me in Anthem. While I would love to just have a huge world, right? I also want that world to have things in it that make it feel like it exists, like it's alive. We don't need an empty world. And this is hopefully something that BioWare has learned from their time working on Inquisition and Andromeda. Those were their first two serious deep dives into very large open worlds, and I think they both had their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, there was some cool stuff inside of Andromeda. Some of the planets were better than others, but there was also a lot of just actual empty, barren space that did nothing other than give you a travel point from one to the next with your Mako. Like, they just felt like they were there to be barren, empty sandboxes for the Mako, and that's no good. We want empty spaces every now and then, but they can't exist 24/7 to connect interesting thing to interesting thing all of the time. And that was obviously one of the areas in which Andromeda really fell short. You could tell it just needed more time and development for those open world areas, or they just struggled with mapping out the open world, and it never got to sort of turn into what they wanted it to be. Inquisition is quite a bit better, but Inquisition suffered from giving us a lot of meaningless tasks within those open worlds. I mean, the Hinterlands is basically an MMO questing area where you spend a bunch of time killing bears for the local population. It's not fun, and that's also something we don't need inside of Anthem, although I doubt they're going to go that route. I don't think we'll be killing 75 bears and giving their pelts to the local shopkeeper in Anthem. But there is still that risk for you to have a really large open world that's filled with mundane tasks. And that's kind of a different discussion for a different time. But I just really want to reiterate that concept of size isn't everything. It's about how that size is handled. So if they give us a massive open world and it's handled well, I'm okay with that, but I would rather have a smaller open world that has that density, that makes use of the game's verticality to make it feel more alive, to make it feel more rich, than just have barren, empty spaces like we got inside of Mass Effect Andromeda. And that's kind of where I'm at with the open world of Anthem. I've got a lot of hopes for it, because when we talk about co-op, like shared world shooter stuff, I mean, The Division, Destiny, you could throw Warframe in there. These are games that give us some areas to explore, but there really hasn't been anything on the level of, say, a Bethesda game when it comes to co-op exploration in these shared world shooters. That's actually why I'm really excited for Fallout 76. I mean, a huge recreation of West Virginia, and I get to explore it with my friends. Yes, please. You know, that's the best thing about Bethesda games, is just wandering and finding that next cavern, finding that next tunnel to go into, that next side quest, that next piece of environmental storytelling. And The Witcher 3 was also phenomenal at this, just giving you an endless amount of new discoveries to make as you actually explored the open world off the beaten path. Having something like that, something like Bethesda and CD Projekt were able to do with The Witcher inside of a shared world shooter like Anthem, would be really special. Like, if you want to talk about strong points for the game after release, for people to be like, you need to play Anthem, that is one of them. Now, granted, this is a more combat-focused, action-oriented experience. We're not going to be going around doing puzzle solving like we would in The Witcher. It doesn't mean there isn't potential for that experience to still be there, and for it to be a lot of fun when you get to do it with friends. You know, finding new combat encounters, fighting hidden world bosses, for example, finding hidden caches, and just finding beautiful bits and pieces of scenery. These are all things that can be made exponentially more enjoyable when you have that force multiplier for the fun factor of playing with others, playing with your friends. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. My hopes, dreams, concerns, a bit of my expectations for the open world of Anthem. You have to remember that this game is 8 months from launch. So there's just a lot of stuff that BioWare isn't talking about yet. It's a lot of things that are being refined. I definitely think it doesn't make sense for them to even talk about the full scale of the open world just yet. They're just too far from launch. There's other things to deliver to the player. There's other things for them as a studio to worry about. And I imagine we'll start to see things unfold over the next, give it like 4 or 5 months. I think when we're like 4 months from launch, you know, maybe we'll be talking beta, demos, whatever they're calling them then, and we'll be getting a little bit more into additional information. Like, everybody wants everything, and I think that's just the way the times have gone. I'm not someone who needs to know everything about a game to, like, feel like, okay, I'm going to make a day one purchase. I want to know things, but I don't need the entire game spoiled for me, and that's kind of the way I feel a lot of the community exists these days with games, is everybody just wants to see everything right from the get-go because they're really concerned about the worth of their dollar. Whereas I see games as a hobby, and it's like, if I see enough to get me excited to feel like they've earned my money, well, then that's what I'm looking for. They haven't quite earned it yet. I'm still really excited, and I'll be there day one just because I'm going to be covering it for the channel, but there are definitely things I want to know, and I think just getting a general idea of what they're doing with the open world is going to be the final piece of the puzzle for me to say, okay, you have now actually earned my day one purchase. Let's see where this game takes us. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, feel free to share all of your personal hopes, dreams, concerns, and expectations for Anthem's open world right down in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next one.
You have been brought here for a purpose, the most important task of your